He headed down the lane with his shotgun over his shoulder. He hoped Joshua was still alive. He hoped Joshua wasn't in Las Vegas. He hoped he could find Mother Abigail. He hoped he didn't run across the walking dude. But he also hoped he'd be strong enough to make his stand if he did.
When I first read Stephen King's The Stand, it was such a visceral experience. It felt like stepping straight into the end of the world. With the outbreak, the government scrambling, not knowing what to do, society is crumbling into chaos, and all of the dangerous people that previously existed on the fringes of society now start coming inland and start to twist what is left of the world into what they want it to be. And then, immediately afterwards, the silence. The Stand is still one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books, but even back then when I was reading it, I remember thinking to myself, when I got done with it, man, I wish there was more. And now, there is. Today we're going to be talking about The End of the World as We Know It, new tales from Stephen King's The Stand. This is a collection of 34 original stories written by some of the biggest names in sci-fi, contemporary horror. I mean, the author list is nuts. It's nuts. You've got Josh Malerman, Ronald Malfi, Poppy Z. Bright, Chuck Wendig, Nat Cassidy, S.A. Cosby, Catriona Ward, and a bunch of other really recognizable names if you read genre fiction. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite stories from the collection. Don't worry, there's not going to be any spoilers or anything like that. But yeah, I'm just going to tell you which ones were my favorite and if I enjoyed myself with this book or not. Unfortunately, none of the stories are written by Stephen King, but the book opens up with an introduction by Stephen King where he kind of talks about when he was first approached about this project and what his initial response was, and that was to say, no. I think he kind of expresses what I think it would feel like for an actor or a musician to be given a Lifetime Achievement Award. When you receive that, it's nice, but it feels like, all right, that's it now. That puts a cap on your career. You've done all of your best work, and this is the end of the story. Congratulations, well done. All the younger up-and-comers get to clap you and see you off. Go on, Grandpa, get going. And that was the kind of, that's not how he worded it, right? But that's sort of like, it felt like that was the idea that he was expressing. And reading that introduction by Stephen King, I know it's a little bit weird to say this, but got a little bit choked up about it, you know? Because, like I said, he was saying, oh no, my best days are still ahead of me. I've still got some great books in me. So that's the reason that he rejected it initially. But then he had a hip replacement and then he was walking around his house using a walker and now using a cane. And then he started to view the book a little bit differently, the project a little bit differently. And he thought to himself, I don't know, maybe I am old. And that's just sad, man, I mean, I think that Stephen King is still, to this day, he's still putting out great books. But it really got me thinking about how there's not really anyone else today that's like Stephen King who has written so many books across so many different genres and reinvented the genres as well. On top of that, every decade, he's released a handful of bangers, in the 70s when he was first starting out, obviously he had Carrie and The Shining, and then in the 80s we got It and Misery, and then in the 90s we got The Green Mile and Needful Things, and then since the 2000s we've had 11/22/63, which is my favorite Stephen King book, and we also got a lot of the books that kind of provided the resolution to the Dark Tower series. We got the Hollyverse, and it just made me think to myself, we're lucky. We're lucky that we got to have him, And I hope he continues writing for a long time. But yeah, when I read that, it sort of took me by surprise a little bit, I was like, So So yeah, I think it's nice that, this collection of writers on the back all got their chance to show how much they love the worlds that Stephen King has created, and also add their own chapter to it. I think that's generous of Stephen King to let them do that, and to give them a platform, even though a lot of them are like really famous writers anyway. Still, there's some slightly lesser known writers, and they're getting a platform as well. And I just think it's nice that he offered that, and I think it's nice that they wanted to do that. One of the things that I really liked about this collection of stories is that it kind of like follows the timeline of the original book, and it's separated into 4 sections. The opening section is called Down with the Sickness, where progressively the virus starts to spread throughout the world. We start off when the disease called Captain Trips is just a little bit of a rumor. And people aren't fully sold on the idea that this is real or that this is going to be a big problem. Anyone that's like reacting to it or takes it seriously is being told that they're crazy and they're overreacting. It's just going to be like a harsh summer cold, Don't overreact. Don't be so dramatic. And that's the mood of the characters for the first handful of stories. I really liked the opening story called Room 24 by Carolyn Kepnes. If you've ever seen the show You, I think it's on Netflix. My wife loves it. I sound like Columbo. My wife, by the way, my wife loves you. Yeah. My wife loves You. Have you ever seen the show on Netflix? Yeah. She wrote the book that show was based on. And her story is about a cop named Abel who has fantasies of being a hero to a woman who is being physically abused by her husband. And so he makes regular house calls to sort of check up on her. And in the background, you get little hints that people are starting to take the super flu more seriously. I think this is one of the short stories that felt the most like a Stephen King book. Not taking anything away from the author. In fact, I mean that as a bit of a compliment. Like, she was really able to capture the tone and create some compelling characters in a short amount of time. And she didn't have to fully rely, because it's quite early in the timeline of The Stand, she didn't really have to rely too much on the source material. Again, this is a book that could have just existed as a standalone story that didn't happen in the universe of The Stand. But as the stories progress, you can tell that they're running in line with that narrative. Another great story is Lockdown, written by Bev Vincent, about a community that are all living on an island. I think it's just like off the East Coast. And they're like this close-knit community who have a town meeting where they share what they've heard about the virus, and it's spreading on the mainland. And so they decide that, look, right now we are all disease-free. And so we're going to lock down this island. No one's coming in. People can leave if they want, but if they leave, they can't come back. But then they have to sort of face the question of, okay, so we've made this decision, but how are we going to enforce it if boats start coming in from the mainland? That's an interesting one. I like that one a lot. Lenora by Jonathan Jans is another good one about a man who's grieving the loss of his wife and child, and he adopts this dik-dik, which I didn't know what it was, but it's kind of like a tiny little chihuahua-sized antelope. And it's like an endangered species. I suppose everything is an endangered species in this world. But he is distracting himself from the chaos that's happening out in the world by making it his purpose to care for this little creature. And you can imagine that this is a pretty emotional one, right? Because he's lost his family and now his whole world has become this little creature that really needs him. So I like that one a lot. Another one that I really enjoyed from the early first section was Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time by C. Robert Cargill. This is, I think, more of a fun book about a group of guys who are living in this small town in Texas who After everyone dies in their little town, they start hanging out together and watching horror movies and drinking beer and stuff like that. They're all discussing film theory and how slasher movies can be cathartic. Then, so that's the first section. Then we move into the next section, which is called The Long Walk, right? So that's another homage to Stephen King. And in this section, the characters all begin their journey to new destinations, right? This is when the virus has fully taken hold. And in this section, in a lot of the stories, dreams play a big part, like kind of how they do in The Stand. And so a lot of the characters in this collection are having similar dreams to the characters from The Stand. I'm not going to spoil The Stand, by the way, just in case you're sort of getting a bit nervous, like, oh, is he going to tell me what happens in The Stand? I'm going to give like an outline, but I'm not going to spoil any big moments or tell you about any characters or anything like that. But yeah, this is the section where dreams start directing characters, and if you've read The Stand, you might have like an idea of these locations that many of these characters might be heading to. This section opens up with a story that I actually really liked called I Love the Dead by Josh Malerman. This is about an obsessive Jerry Garcia fan. He's like a super fan. And he carries an acoustic guitar around on his back, even though he can't play guitar. And he's kind of, I thought that was a funny detail that he's just like walking around like a rock star, but he can't play anything. And he feels like he's on like a pilgrimage to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco to see if Jerry Garcia is still alive. In this section of the book, it felt to me anyway, and maybe this is just my own reading tastes, but it felt to me as though the names were starting to get a little more recognizable. Like I say, you had Josh Malerman, and then the immediate story that followed that was The Legion of Swine by S.A. Cosby. This story is about a pig farmer who has lost his family. That's probably like redundant to say that he's lost his family, to be honest. I've said that a couple of times. You can safely assume that everyone has lost their family. And now he just wants to be left alone, but he realizes that he might not be able to avoid what is happening in the world. He gets some visitors that kind of like interrupt his life and everything, and things get crazy from there. In this story, S.A. Cosby also has the coolest way to describe the sharpness of a knife. I loved it. It was one of my favorite. I don't know why. It was just a little throwaway quote, S.A. Cosby, he can just do that. He can just go, oh yeah, have that, and you just go, oh wow, thanks. That was really cool. Yeah, so let me know if you read that line and if you like that line. But it's one of those where it made me wish that Frank Mueller was still alive to narrate it, because I just think that he would have made it sound even cooler if he read it. There's also a couple of stories that are set outside of the US, and I was grateful for that because whenever I read these books or see these dystopian movies like The Stand or The Walking Dead or Hunger Games or Swan Song, I always wonder, because they're usually set in the US, I always wonder, what's going on in the rest of the world? And so, yeah, we got a couple of stories like that. There's one called Across the Pond by V. Castro, set in England. There's another one, The Mosque at the End of the World by Usman T. Malik, and that is set in Pakistan. So it kind of like answered those questions a little bit. And then you get the final two sections. The next one's called Life Was Such a Wheel, which is actually based after the events of The Stand. My favorite story from this was Grand Junction by Chuck Wendig, and this felt like a dystopian Western where a bunch of gunslingers, not like gunslingers from the Dark Tower, just in the regular sense, like, gunslingers. They are all loading up and going on a manhunt for a dangerous criminal. And then, so I like that one. The fourth and final section is titled Other Worlds Than These, a little nod to the Dark Tower there. Do any of these stories link up with the Dark Tower? Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think? I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to find out for yourself, baby. Sorry for calling you baby. In this section, I love the story called and I'm going to struggle to say this one, The Unfortunate Convalescence of the Super Lawyer. And that was written by Nat Cassidy. It's so clear to me when I was reading this how much of a fan Cassidy is of Stephen King. There's lots of little nods to his work here and there. And I think this book was maybe one of my favorites, if not my favorite in the whole collection. Now, I quite liked this book, but for the first time, I want to do a fun feature where I read some of the reviews which just totally disagree with my point of view. But just before we dive into that, I want to thank all of my Patreon members for supporting the channel. And if you like this channel and you'd like to support it and get some perks so yeah, I was looking at some less than favorable reviews on Goodreads and a few other different platforms. And so a lot of them disagreed with me and my feelings about this book. And so we're going to introduce a brand new feature on the channel called Did We Read the Same Book? All right, so I'm not going to read out the commenters' names because, I don't want to pick on them or anything, This is all meant in a fun, good-natured way, right? But we're just going to have a bit of fun with it. Just try it out. The author lineup for this anthology are some of, I guess, today's biggest horror authors. I guess. But most of the stories they turned in seemed to be copy and paste trash, which made the book so boring to me, so frustrated with it, I wanted to chuck it across the room. This is a much nicer review than they deserve. Don't waste your money or your time. These authors had their chance to write within the world of The Stand, and they all pretty much decided to write the exact same crappy story like it was too much for any of them to bother caring about the opportunity they were given. And I'm pretty sure that... Sorry. I was waiting to take a breath. This guy's mad. It was too much for any of them to bother caring about the opportunity they were given. And I'm pretty sure a few of them never actually read the book they were supposed to be anthologizing. I guess they had all collectively something better to do than bother putting any time into something like this. I don't know. If I'm one of these authors who I know for a fact go out of their way to praise Stephen King every chance they get, and someone gave me a chance to write a story for the first ever Stephen King anthology, I would have taken it as the greatest opportunity I would ever have. Instead, what these guys did was write the exact same story, copy and pasted for 800 pages, then slap King's name on it, ensuring suckers like me would fork over the $30. This book was a slap in the face to anyone who's read The Stand. In the whole book, I can only pick out two stories where the authors wrote from the perspective of the antagonistic bad guy, which is what made The Stand enjoyable. The clash between good and evil, written from both perspectives. Instead, here we get the whole bunch of stories about the good guys, and even those are pretty much copy and paste perfunctory, mundane BS that wouldn't hold up if Stephen King's name wasn't slapped on the cover. It's really boring, really bad, and is unworthy of the original work. I'm contemplating returning the book. I'm mocking the voice, but I promise I'm doing it for comedic effect, right? So if by some crazy chance you happen to be watching this, I promise I'm not making fun of you. I'm just having fun with it, I looked at the other reviews on here and noticed that most seem to be written by people who hadn't even read the book yet or have a vested interest in giving it a better review than it deserves because they got the ARC and want to keep receiving ARC copies in exchange for their not so honest review. It's a bummer because I love almost every one of these authors' individual works, but wow, this is bad. Kind of contradicted yourself a little bit there, bro. At first you're going, I guess these are the top authors today. And then at the end, you say you're a massive fan of all their works. Make that make sense? Don't worry, I won't just pick on you. I'm going to pick on other people. Pale echoes of greatness. Lame and pointless. Talk about misplaced hopes. I had been waiting for the end of the world for months. It's a funny sentence. I purchased it the day it was released, and boy, was I disappointed. This review is based on the first 8 stories. I wanted to go the distance, but based on what I read so far, honestly, I just couldn't. It began with Room 24, which was the worst of them. I thought it was one of the best. And I couldn't help but wonder, why would they include such a dud? Let alone choose it as their flagship narrative. Admittedly, the second story seemed to offer redemption, hope, and promise. Unfortunately, the next half dozen ranged from mediocre at best to disappointing, or worse, utter train wrecks. I thought it would be fun to re-enter the world of The Stand, but these stories never did that. For the most part, except for vague mentions of Mother Abigail and the Dark Man, they don't feel authentic. They read less like King and more like bad fan fiction. And to add insult to injury, this project doesn't seem to bring anything new to the table. It's all just more of the same. This one says, yeah, I'm a Stephen King fan from his first book. I was so excited to see this collection come out because The Stand is in my top 2 or 3 of his books. What a disappointment. The first 3 stories are so bad that I have zero interest in trying another one. A huge waste of time and money. I wish Stephen King would have gone with his first instinct and said no. I should mention that this book right now is sitting at a 4.09 stars. So if you're curious about this book, don't let these guys dissuade you from it. This one says, I read The Stand for the first time in elementary school. I found the uncut version in middle school, and a conservative estimate, I would say I've read it 24 times since. It's quite a lot. It's quite a chunky book as well. This is a real fan that's writing this. I loved this story and craved rereads the way you would crave your grandma's best meal from your childhood summer vacations. My grandma didn't cook for me on summer vacations. This book is not that meal. It's really like going in with the grandma's meal analogy. The stories are fair to middling, but most barely even a nod at the source, and are instead focused on sex-fed sea creatures, vapid mysteries, or twisted metal-esque car chases with sporadic superficial The Stand references sprinkled throughout. Baby, can you dig your man being the primary connector for piece after piece of random fiction drivel. I will agree on this point, actually, that every character from these short stories, because these authors are all writing it independently from one another, right? They all thought that they would be the one to include Baby, Can You Dig Your Man, which is a song from the original, from The Stand. And so it just sort of got a bit too much that every single character was obsessed with this song. None of them feel like the universe. And when someone had Mother Abigail... actually, I'm not going to say that bit because I don't want to spoil anything. And then they just end it with, no great loss. So that's a pretty interesting place to leave off, because if you have read The Stand, you'll know that there's this section in The Stand where it's kind of like zipping all over town. Like now it's over here, now it's over there. Stephen King are writing all these like little flash fiction stories, you know? And then at the end of it, he always says, no great loss. And this book is kind of like that. Imagine that, where it's like giving all little short stories everywhere, but just imagine extended versions. I think the main complaint of all of these complaints here seems to be that these stories are written without any like true connection to the source material. I would disagree with that, actually. I don't want to misrepresent what these reviewers are feeling or what they're saying, but my point of view was that there's 34 writers who have 34 different writing styles, and they're all independently writing from 34 different angles. It's not like this is a collaborative effort where they're all working together. I think if every story would have relied 100% on the fact that it's in The Stand, I know that's sort of the idea, but if it was like basically following in the exact same footsteps of all of the characters from The Stand, then this would have started to feel really, really repetitive. Like just hearing that same thing 34 times. Those people that say it's copy and pasted, imagine if they were just writing what happened in The Stand, but in 34 different ways. That'd be really annoying, wouldn't it? I think the best way to think about this book is that it's like a celebration of The Stand, but I think you should also think of it as a stage to showcase some of the best horror and sci-fi writers of today. And so for that reason, I gave it 4 stars. But let me know in the comment section if you agree with me or if you agree with these people on Goodreads. Look, everyone's got a point of view, you know what I mean? If you enjoyed this review and you'd like to see my review of The Stand, which I recorded, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, then you can click up here to see that. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And as always, happy reading.